I was left alone with a newborn. My husband walked away after our baby was born. I became a single mom with no money and no support. But this is a story about love, family, second chances, and how life changes when you feel completely broken. My name is Jessie, and just a year ago, I stood in a cold apartment holding my baby Michael, not knowing how to keep going. He left. No explanation. No regret. I learned how to survive, delivering flowers to strangers, watching them love each other, while I slowly forgot what it felt like to be loved. Until one day, I walked into a small café and met him, Frank, a man who didn't promise everything. He just stayed. This is a story about pain, loss, and loneliness, and about real love that finds you when you least expect it. Sometimes life takes everything away, so it can give you what was always meant to be yours.
Love Stories Max. Welcome to my channel. Enjoy watching, friends.
He left me with a newborn, but life gave me a second chance. I remember that morning so clearly, as if it never really ended. Michael was only 4 months old. He lay in the old crib by the window, breathing softly, sometimes twitching in his sleep as if he were dreaming something important. I sat nearby, hugging my knees, watching the sunlight slowly crawl across the floor of our small rented apartment. There used to be warmth here. There used to be laughter. There used to be John. And now only silence pressing on my chest so hard it sometimes felt difficult to breathe. John didn't disappear all at once. It wasn't like he just left one day and never came back. No, he faded out gradually. At first, he stayed late at work. Then he started accidentally crashing at friends' places. Then he would come home at dawn, smelling of alcohol mi parfumami, and a kind of indifference you can't wash away. I remember one night, Michael was crying. It was that kind of cry you can't ignore, thin, desperate, like a call for help. I held him in my arms, rocking him, whispering, "Shua, baby. Mommy's here. I'm here." And at that moment, the door quietly opened. John. He stood in the hallway, swaying slightly. His eyes were glassy, his jacket unzipped, his phone in his hand. "You're still not sleeping," he muttered, not even looking at us. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "John," my voice trembled, but I gathered all my strength. "We need to talk." He rolled his eyes. "Not now, Jessie." "When?" I almost whispered. "When our son grows up without a father?" He was silent for a few seconds. Then he just took off his jacket, threw it onto a chair and said, "I'm not ready for this. For all of this." He waved his hand at me, at Michael, at the apartment. "I still want to live." Those words, they felt like something inside me snapped. "And what is this?" I barely held back my tears. "This isn't life?" He didn't answer. The next morning he was gone, and he never came back. The divorce passed like a blur. Papers, signatures, cold looks. I didn't even cry. Maybe I just didn't have any strength left. I came home with Michael in my arms and for the first time felt real fear. Not for myself. For him. "How am I going to raise you?" I whispered, looking at his tiny face. My mom, Scarlett, helped as much as she could. She came in the evenings, brought soup, sometimes a little money, but I could see how tired she was. Her hands trembled when she held Michael. "I'll manage, Mom," I would say, even though I didn't believe it myself. The nights were the hardest. Michael woke up every 2 hours. I walked around the apartment with him, rocking him, singing quiet lullabies I remembered from childhood. Sometimes I cried with him, quietly, so I wouldn't scare him. After a few days I realized, this couldn't go on. I barely left the house. The air in the apartment had become heavy, just like my thoughts. "We need a stroller, baby," I said, looking at Michael. "We can't stay in here all the time." I couldn't afford a new one. I opened a classifieds website. My fingers trembled as I scrolled page after page. The prices felt like blows, each number reminding me how little money I had left. And then, there it was. A gray stroller. An older model, a bit worn, but it was beautiful. I don't know how to explain it. It looked like it had already lived through many stories. Like a vintage car, not new but with a soul. And the price? It was almost all the money I had left. I stared at the screen for a long time. "We'll take the risk, okay?" I whispered to Michael. He just looked at me with his big eyes. I dressed him, wrapped him in a blanket, and stepped outside. The air was cold but fresh. I took a deep breath and for the first time in a long while, felt like I was still alive. The address wasn't far. Every step felt heavy, not because I was tired but because I was afraid. Afraid of making another mistake. Afraid of spending the last of my money. I knocked on the door. A woman in her 60s opened it. She had kind eyes. "You're here for the stroller?" she asked. I nodded. She silently stepped aside, inviting me in. And then I saw it. The same stroller stood by the window. The light fell on it in such a way that it almost looked new. I walked closer, ran my hand along the handle. "It belonged to my grandson," the woman said softly. "He grew up." I swallowed. "It's beautiful." She looked at me, then at Michael. "How old is he?" "4 months." She smiled, and suddenly said, "Take it for half the price." I froze. But I can see," she gently interrupted. "You need it more." Tears rolled down my cheeks on their own. I don't remember how I thanked her. I don't remember handing over the money. I only remember walking outside with that stroller. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. I placed Michael inside. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and smiled. A tiny, barely noticeable smile. And that was enough. "We'll make it," I whispered. And this time, I truly believed it. I don't know the exact moment when fear turned into action. Maybe it was when I realized no one but me was going to build a life for Michael. I found a small side job delivering flowers. In our little town, there were only 2 flower shops, but men here still remembered to give flowers. Sometimes just because. Sometimes to say, "I'm sorry." Sometimes to say, "I love you" when words weren't enough. And somehow, I became part of those stories. Every morning started the same. I woke up before the alarm, not because of the sound but because of the tension inside me. I checked on Michael. He breathed softly, and I always paused for a second just to look at him. "We're going to be okay, right?" I whispered. I packed him like we were going on a small journey. Diapers, a spare onesie, wipes, a few bottles with cereal, placing everything carefully, like they weren't just things but small guarantees of survival. Then the stroller. Then the flowers. I held bouquets in one hand and pushed the stroller with the other. Sometimes the wind scattered petals, sometimes the stems slipped, sometimes my fingers went numb from the cold. Sometimes, I just wanted to sit down on the sidewalk and cry. But I didn't. I kept walking. Every day, dozens of steps, hundreds of meters, miles of thoughts. And then one day my phone rang. "Jessie, you've got 7 deliveries today," the florist said. 7. I stayed silent for a moment, looking at Michael. "Okay," I answered quietly. That day was harder than all the others. I walked faster than usual. My shoulders ached. The hand holding the bouquets went numb. The stroller wheels caught in cracks in the pavement. The sun burned, then suddenly a cold wind hit. I was running late. And that's when Michael started crying. At first softly, then louder. And then like his whole little world was falling apart. "Sure, baby, just a little longer. Please?" I was almost begging. But he was hungry. And I knew he wouldn't wait. I looked around and saw a café. That one. I had passed it dozens of times. And always, I felt someone watching me. Warmly. A little shy. The barista. He used to smile at me. And I always hurried past. I stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around me instantly, like someone placed a blanket over my shoulders. The smell of coffee, pastries, and a piece of a life where babies didn't cry. Michael cried loudly. Too loudly. I felt people turning to look. Please, some boiled water," I said quickly, walking up to the counter. He was there. The barista. He looked at me, not annoyed, not surprised, but gently. "Of course," he said, already moving quickly, confidently. His hands worked like he had done this 1,000 times, like he was doing it just for me. Michael cried even louder. I felt embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to explain." "It's okay," he said softly. "Sit down." He pointed to a table. I sat, trying to calm Michael, but my hands were shaking. A few seconds later, he was already beside me. "Here's the water, careful, it's hot." I cooled it down a bit. He even thought about that. I made the cereal, gave Michael the bottle, and it got quiet. Finally, I exhaled, and in that moment he sat down for a second, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He reached out his hand. "I'm Frank." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. "Jessie," I said softly, and that's how my story with Frank began. I didn't even notice when Frank became part of my life. At first, it was just quick stops, for a minute, then short conversations, and then it became something my day felt incomplete without. He always greeted me the same way, with a soft smile and warm eyes, like I wasn't just walking into a café, but coming home. "Coffee?" he would ask, and never wait for an answer. He already knew what I liked. Warm, not too strong, with a splash of milk. I would sit at the same table by the window, place the stroller beside me, take off my gloves, rubbing my fingers that still remembered the cold outside. And for a few minutes, the world would pause. "How many deliveries today?" Frank would ask, sometimes sitting across from me. "5, maybe 6. I'd sigh, smiling. "Easy day." He would laugh quietly. "You're stronger than you think, Jessie." I didn't know if that was true, but I liked the way it sounded. He never took money from me. Not once. "Frank, I can't do this," I'd say, and he'd just shake his head. "I'm just doing one good thing a day." And he would look at me like that thing wasn't the coffee. It was me. Michael got used to him too. Sometimes when Frank leaned over the stroller, Michael would look at him with wide eyes, and then smile. And in those moments, I felt something inside me slowly thawing. And then one day, I had a delivery. The address felt familiar. Frank's Cafe. I smiled to myself. "Well, little one, we'll take a short break, okay?" I whispered to Michael. When I walked in, the smell of coffee felt warmer than usual. Frank was behind the counter. He looked up, and his face changed instantly. "Jessie." I lifted the bouquet. "This delivery is for here." He walked closer, took the flowers. I expected him to just set them aside like always, but he didn't. He looked at them, then at me, and handed them back. "These are for you." I froze. "What?" "Jessie," he took a breath. "Will you go on a date with me?" The world suddenly felt quieter. All I could hear was my heartbeat. I had seen so many people give flowers to someone else. Men standing there, nervous, smiling. Women surprised, happy. But me, I had forgotten that someone could give flowers to me. The words got stuck in my throat. Frank looked at me so carefully, like he was afraid to scare me away. And then I softly said, "Yes." And in that moment, something inside me finally let go of the pain. Our first date was simple, and that's what made it perfect. He didn't take me to a fancy restaurant. He didn't try to impress me. He just stayed with me. We walked through a small park. The streetlights were starting to glow with a soft, warm light. The air was cool but not cold, the kind that makes you wrap your scarf tighter. Michael was asleep in the stroller. Quiet, peaceful, like he knew this night mattered. Frank walked beside me. Sometimes our hands brushed, and every time it felt like a small spark. "Are you always this strong?" he asked quietly. I smiled. "No, I just don't have a choice." He looked at me more seriously. "You do. You just choose not to give up." I didn't answer, but I remembered that. We sat down on a bench. He had brought 2 cups of coffee in paper cups. "I couldn't come without this," he smiled. I laughed. For the first time in a long while, truly. We talked about everything. Childhood, fears, dreams that felt too far away. And at some point I realized I wasn't thinking about John. For the first time, I was just living this moment. Frank looked at me like I mattered. Not convenient, not temporary, but real. And when we said goodbye, he didn't rush. "Thank you for tonight, Jessie." I nodded. I really needed this. He leaned in slightly like he wanted to say something, but stopped, and just smiled. And I walked home. And for the first time in a long time, I was smiling to myself. A year has passed. Sometimes it feels like it wasn't even me. Like that girl standing in a cold apartment with a newborn in her arms, not knowing how to live anymore. That was someone else. Guys, now, I'm standing in a small bright kitchen. Our kitchen. There are still warm cups of coffee on the table, the same coffee Frank once handed me across the counter, and now makes every morning quietly so he doesn't wake Michael. Michael is walking now. His little feet step across the floor, a bit wobbly sometimes. He laughs loud, pure, filling the whole house with that sound. And when Frank lifts him into his arms, I see it. I see a real father. Not someone who has to be, but someone who wants to be. Our wedding was small. No luxury. No big hall. No hundreds of guests. Just us, my mom, a few close people, and warm sunlight that seemed to choose to be there with us that day. I remember standing next to Frank, the way he held my hand just a little tighter than necessary, the way he looked at me like he was afraid it might be a dream. "I promised to be there," he said quietly, and I believed him, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. This morning started like any other, but it became something more. I stood in the bathroom, in my hands a small plastic test. My heart was racing like it was trying to escape my chest. I knew this moment. I remembered the fear, the loneliness, the silence after the words. "I'm not ready." I was almost afraid to breathe. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Please." A few seconds. I opened my eyes. 2 lines. Clear. Real. And in that moment, I wasn't scared. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel alone. I just cried. But these were different tears. Warm. Soft. Happy. I pressed my hand to my lips, trying not to cry out loud, but I couldn't hold it in. "Frank," I whispered, my voice breaking. He heard me. He always does. He walked into the bathroom quietly, a little worried. "Jessie, what happened?" I just handed him the test. His expression was tense at first, then surprised, and then his eyes filled with light. "Is this real?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. He hugged me, so tight, and yet so gentle. "We've got this," he whispered, and I smiled through my tears, 'cause this time, I knew it was true. That day I stood by the window, watching Michael laugh as Frank spun him around the room, and I thought, life doesn't always break us. Sometimes it rebuilds us, through pain, through loss, through those moments when it feels like nothing is left, so that later can give us something real. I touched my stomach, softly, carefully, and whispered, "Everything will be different this time. 'Cause now, I'm not alone. I have a family, a real one, strong, loving." Sometimes to find your happiness, you first have to lose what was never truly yours. And now I know, love isn't words. It's presence. It's a choice, every single day. And I choose this life, again and again.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss new stories. And also write in the comments how you liked this story on a scale of 1 to 5. Watch the following video and enjoy watching.